As a side note, I'll tell you that we're at this point in the life of our church where we are hitting numbers with kids on Sunday morning that we used to touch on Easter. And that is like beginning to be an every week thing. So that, yeah, God's blessed us, but there's also a need that comes with it. So if you are somebody who might be interested in serving in some way in the very needful and incredibly, it's never boring ministry of dealing with the kids, you can talk to me or Sarah. Today we're starting into a second part on the series on talking about other religions. Because, as a Christian, even if you've already decided, look, I'm a Jesus follower and to be like that until the day that I die, sometimes, people have this, thought of like, well, how do I know that this is true and everything else is false? So we're going through, we're just examining step by step and just looking at what other options are out there. And I'd like to start this morning by asking you, how do you define a sandwich? You guys are looking confused. How would you define a sandwich? Anybody? 2 pieces of bread, something in between them? Okay, you think that's fine, but let me ask you this. Are hot dogs sandwiches? Some confusion there. I mean, it was not quite 2 pieces of bread. I would say no, you can't call a hot dog a sandwich. That's 1 piece of bread. It's just kind of split down the middle a little bit. And what about hamburgers, though? If we say a sandwich is 2 pieces of bread and something in between them, well then, hamburgers are sandwiches. But that leads us to a problem. Because if that's a sandwich, then McDonald's sells sandwiches and Subway doesn't. You can only get an accidental sandwich at Subway if they cut all the way through the bread with the knife. That just doesn't make sense to me. And New York recently officially declared burritos to be sandwiches. They have descended into madness. I don't know what's going on up there. Now, if you were to spend several days meditating on these questions and decide, you can't contain sandwiches in logic. You can only experience them. And isn't everything a sandwich in a way? You have just stumbled upon basically Hinduism. Hinduism, for a lot of Americans, is like very exotic, very colorful. You think of deities with a whole bunch of arms, the color powder festival. And it's difficult to define it because Hinduism is far more concerned with questions than answers. They reject rigid categories. They will often claim that it cannot be logically understood. They have no governing body. There are tons of different sacred texts, but none of them agree on exactly what they are. And even then, it almost doesn't matter because they say that they're basically mythological. Don't ask if they ever actually happened. Last week, I introduced you guys to the basic categories of ways that we look at God. This is monotheism. There is a God who created the universe. He's separate from it. Then you have, this is atheism. You have the universe and no God. You have pantheism, which is everything is God. And you have polytheism, which is there's a bunch of little gods. And here's the mind-blowing thing. If you ask a Hindu about these 4 categories, they might say yes to any one of them. Or all of them. It's really difficult to define. But they have 2 most of them would hold the 2 consistent beliefs. And the first has to do with the idea of karma. Now, I cringe every time I hear Christians use this word. I see it a lot. People have those Facebook posts because their ex is treating them wrong. Let karma take care of them. And you guys, it's a Western thing. We rip stuff out of other religions and just use the words on our own. And karma is a Hindu concept, meaning basically you get what you deserve. And usually we as Westerners think about it in terms of this life. I had a coworker, one of the migrant workers when I was working in construction, and he asked me one morning if I would compose a loving text to his wife, like, "Hey baby, I love you" in English. It could sound really fancy. And then I composed a text, and as he went to hit send, I was like, hold on, your wife's name isn't Jessica. Who is this other girl that you're and at that instant, a wasp stung him in the eye. And of course, I was like, you see? You shouldn't do that. He was like, that's brutal. You're a witch. And so for a lot of Westerners, that's how we think of karma. And it carries this sense of like justice. You get what you deserve. And this is very different, though, from in Christianity, because in Hindu thought, karma is like just an impersonal law of the universe. That what you do like comes back to you. The Christian idea, justice comes, but it is a personal justice enacted by God. And the core of the gospel is we don't get what we deserve. Thankfully. Psalm 103 verse 10 says, He does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. And again, in Hinduism, the idea of karma, you get what you deserve, is not primarily attached to getting stung in the eye. It's what's going to happen in your next life. And so most Hindus hold to the concept of reincarnation. It's hard for us, again, to approach from a Western mindset because we have a very linear way of thinking, and that's what the Bible presents. In the beginning, God created the universe, and some stuff happens in between, and then God is going to bring an end to all things. It progresses in a linear fashion. The same with you. You are born, and then some stuff happens in between, and then you die. It progresses in a linear fashion. But that's not the way that Hindus look at the world. For them, it is this constant circular cycle. Not only the universe, but your individual life as well. And so they would say that you are constantly dying and being reborn as something else. And here's where karma comes into play in their way of thinking, that what you get reborn as is determined by your karma and your past life. And so if you do really well, you may return as a more enlightened being. Or if you've been bad, you might come back as a slug or even a rock. Now, don't ask me to explain to you how a slug can accrue good karma. Maybe you leave a better trail of slime than all the other slugs, and you stay out of people's gardens. I'm not sure how that works. But so there's this constant cycle of rebirth. And here's what's fascinating to me, is how prevalent these Hindu ideas are in the United States. They did a survey, Barna did, and this is among regular churchgoers, people who are in church most Sundays. 20% of them said, yeah, I think reincarnation happens. That's fascinating to me. This thought kind of pervades the church. And just to be clear with you people, you only live once. Literally YOLO, as the kids said like 6 years ago. Hebrews 9:27 says this, and just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. Now in Hinduism, the goal, as you're going through this endless cycle of dying and rebirth, the goal is to progress spiritually to a point where you can escape that pattern. So basically, it's the movie Groundhog Day. Your goal is to escape that constant pattern. All 5 of you have seen the movie. You're trying to escape reincarnation. And so they'll do this by attempting to live rightly. They'll do spiritual practices for them like yoga and meditation. Buddhism is kind of like a distant cousin born out of Hinduism. They hold the same ideas of karma and reincarnation, and they try and escape reincarnation as well. In Buddhism and Hinduism, the focus, though, is entirely on your efforts to get better. And they'll say, like, it's not even, you got to try hard in this life. You got to try hard for like thousands of years, and maybe someday you'll reach a state of enlightenment and you'll finally get free of this. There is no concept of grace. Again, this is central to Christianity. Titus 3:5. He saved us not because of works done by us in righteousness, but according to his own mercy. And this, again, I say it a lot, but this is the way Christianity is different than every other religion out there. The idea of grace, being loved and treated in a way that we do not deserve. That is how we relate to God. So then we say, okay, well, they're different. But how do we know that Hinduism isn't true? I mean, sometimes, I feel like I, could have been a cat in a past life because I like naps or something like that. And I'll just say this. If it is true that people are constantly being reborn according to what they did in their past lives, you need to consider what this says to parents whose child is born with a birth defect. Think about that. If you take seriously the idea of karma and reincarnation, the only logical conclusion is to go to the parent and say, yes, your child is born deformed because they were a real scumbag before. And they deserve this. This is justice. And I've just seen an argument, and they said, literally, if you're born with crooked teeth, it's an indication of telling lies in past lives. It's terrible to consider. You also have the idea of reincarnation, and okay, you're born into what you deserve, has allowed for the caste system to exist for centuries in India. And even though they're trying to get rid of this now, but for most of history in India, you have these tiers, and if you're born at the top, it's pretty nice. The Brahmins, they get to be the rulers and the priests and stuff like this, and it kind of goes down, and you see that bottom layer, those are the manual laborers, and then below them you have the Dalits, the untouchables. Those who are born even without a caste, they do the worst work there is. Because they deserve it, because they didn't reach enlightenment in a previous life. And I love that concept, because comparing that to the gospel, here's what the Bible says. God chose the Dalits. God chose what is low and despised in the world to call his own. It is a total reversal of that pyramid. Where they would say, well, maybe someday you'll get to reborn as an enlightened being like me. We say, no, we go to the lowest of the low. And I want you guys to be praying for me, because I think I've discovered and found the people who cut the fuel line on the bus. 2 young men were arrested by Oregon County a few weeks ago, going around and vandalizing churches. And pray for me, because this week I am going to contact the county jail and ask if I can go and visit them. And I would like to face-to-face express forgiveness and to offer to buy them dinner when they get out. That is what the gospel looks like. It's so very different than what we find in Hinduism. We also have this idea of pantheism. Now, again, if you go to India, has been called, the land of 3 million deities. But a lot of them would look at even all those different idols that they bow down to, and the different gods like Shiva and Krishna and Ganesh. They would say that all of them are manifestations of one God, Brahman, that is everything. The universe is Brahman. So your cat is God. Your cat already thinks it's God, but they would say your cat literally is God in some form, and what you feed your cat is God, and what comes out of your cat is God as well. And you are God. Now here in the West, we really eat that up. I mean, Oprah, oh yeah, tell me I'm a goddess. They're all about that. You can go to any bookstore and find books on discovering your inner goddess. Funny how they don't cater to males like that. I've seen as much. And they say, okay, you've got to meditate and become one, with the universe and that kind of thing. But if we would say that the old gods of paganism, Zeus and all them, they're not worth worshiping because they're so terribly flawed, then how are we any different? I mean, if I am what God looks like, that's a pretty poor deity. And one of the biggest arguments against the church is, people look at church people and they say, oh, look at them, they do all this bad stuff, they have all these flaws, and they claim that God is reforming them. How much worse is that if you're literally saying, oh yeah, all those people, they are God, and there is nothing else? How can you explain why you are still broken? There's no amount of gazing at your navel that will fix what is broken in you. What is the promise given by Satan behind the first sin? You will be like God. Romans 1:25 again describes what happens when people reject the true worship of God. It says they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator who is blessed forever. Amen. Do you hear the difference there? It is a terrible thing to take the worship of the invisible God, and he says you cannot confuse the two. There's the stuff God has made, and then there is God. Now we'll say that God is omnipresent, meaning God is present everywhere. You can't escape him by fleeing to Canada. God is there as well. But God is not Canada. There's a difference. And so you can't confuse. And so when you're bowing down to things made out of wood and stone and gold and silver, that's just the stuff God's made, not the Creator. Now creation is good, but God existed before it. The skies will wear out, but he will remain. So I also might ask, somebody who subscribes to this way of thinking, okay, you are God, yes. You believe that you are God, yes. You know that you are God. Okay, make me a rock. Now, don't pick one out of your backpack. Mitchell loves finding rocks in the garage. No, make me a rock if you're God. Jesus claimed to be God in the flesh, and he said, don't just believe me, look at the signs that I'm doing. He raised the dead to life. He made blind people see. Now, typically they'll say, no, you see, me becoming one with the universe, it's like an inward experience, like transcendence. I just feel this divinity within me. You understand that human feelings are basically the most unreliable thing in the universe. And that's a point that Christine, in about 7 years, is going to hammer home real hard with us. Look at the subway ads. Right? Apparently, you can have a mystical experience by eating a sandwich. You take a bit of LSD, you will have a mystical experience with a sandwich, but it means nothing. It's just your feelings. You're building your entire view of the universe based on the least reliable part of human existence. They would also say that the world is an illusion, this idea of Maya. They would say, no, you're not you. You're everyone else. You believe that you aren't really you. You're just Brahman God experiencing himself. And so the ground isn't real. And say, yes, the ground isn't real. And you're not real. They say, no, I am an illusion. What about the trucks out there? Are they real? No, they are an illusion. Why don't you walk out there and become one with one of them? Do you not really believe that they are an illusion? And again, why do you still need to eat food? If you're saying that you are self-aware God and all of this is an illusion, you have become Neo from the Matrix. I want to see you stop a bullet. They're also, they apply this to the idea of suffering. In Hinduism, again, because of the laws of karma, you deserve your suffering. If you're experiencing pain and heartache and dysfunction, they would say, well, it's because you've done something bad and this is happening to you. And in fact, if you go and help somebody else who is suffering, so if we go and develop a prosthetic limb for somebody who's missing one, I might be messing with karma, which is giving them what they deserve, and I might get something bad that happens to me. There's also an attempt to say that, well, all of your suffering is just an illusion, because none of this, after all, is real. After all, you are Brahman and all is one, and eventually distinctions like pain and pleasure, right and wrong, true and false, are rejected as you become more and more, as they would say, enlightened. Now, call me unenlightened, but it seems really unsatisfying to say that the way to deal with pain is to say that none of it's real anyways. Go tell somebody with chronic back pain, you know, your back doesn't really hurt. It's just your nerves misfiring and you only think it hurts. Go meditate on that and it'll be fixed. It's the same with Buddhism. Buddhism is kind of odd in that Buddha said nothing about God whatsoever. And so a lot of times you find it kind of like a vine that grows on the surface of other religions. So it doesn't say anything about God, but the central point of it is to eliminate suffering. It's very similar to Hinduism here. And so they would say that all suffering happens to you because you care about stuff. You're attached to stuff. And so the goal of Buddhism is to deal with the problem of suffering by no longer caring about anything. So they have like the Eightfold Path, that you've got to meditate and do all this stuff to try and avoid any attachment to anything. And so this results in somebody loving their wife being described at times as a disease of the mind. Because you're attached to something and that's going to bring suffering. And so the answer is to replace it with kind of a general love of everything equally, which means nothing in particular. So you have the Buddhist poet Bharathi, who lived in poverty and would go and throw the last of his family's grain to the birds because he viewed their small, hungry stomachs as of equal importance to those of his own family. Ravi Zacharias met with a Hindu philosopher and asked, the Dalai Lama, Tibetan monk, one of the leaders for them, he has made it a goal in his life to bring freedom to Tibet. And he says, why does he care? Why does he care about Tibet? As a Buddhist, you're supposed to not be attached to anything. So again, I have to say that really attachment is something to be avoided. Mark 12, again, Christianity is almost the polar opposite. Mark 12, verse 30 and 31, Jesus said, the most important commandment of all, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is kind of the opposite of avoiding attachment. And yes, it brings pain. You love your neighbor as yourself, there will be pain involved. Sarah, when she's about to go through childbirth, there's going to be buckets of pain, and it'll be my fault because I tricked her into wanting more kids. But I can tell you, I won't be there telling you, oh, Sarah, it's okay, your suffering's just an illusion. Oh, Sarah, you're only suffering because you care that you're suffering. No. I think that might bring some suffering my way. So yes, of course if you're attached to stuff, it brings suffering. But the point is, it's worth it. So when we ask, how do you deal with the problem of pain? There's nothing else that is compelling as the gospel. 2 Corinthians 4. Now I want you to listen to this. And in some ways it almost sounds similar to some things I've just said, but there's some very important differences. Paul here writes about dealing with suffering. He says, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. We're not told that our bodies are somehow illusions and that our pain isn't real. Instead, we're told that this is temporary. There will come an end to this. And that in the end of all things, our pain will be seen as worth it. What it is the Christian, and this is all through the New Testament as a Christian, as you suffer, God is aware of your suffering, and there will be a time of repayment. And I've talked with some of you as you've gone through the struggle, and the encouragement is God knows. He sees everything that you endure, and the promise is that it will be worth it. And so when he says it's light and momentary, Paul went through some stuff. It was real, but he says, when I put it on the scales, to God spending all of eternity demonstrating his kindness toward us, it's light, and it's temporary. And so we look to God, not because the physical world isn't there, but because it will come to an end, and we will be in the presence of God forever and ever. And it goes beyond that, though. It says that your suffering is real, and God knew pain. 1 Peter 2:21. For to this you've been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. If you feel like you're at the bottom of the well, the Hindu might walk by and say, you see it as an illusion. You only think that you're in there, in the bottom of the pit. The Buddhist might come by and say, your problem is that you care that you're in the bottom of this pit. And then Jesus comes by, and he himself descends into the pit with us to raise us out of it. God cares for you. We're not just commanded to be attached to stuff. The mind-blowing thing is that God is attached to us. 1 Peter 4:7, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. God doesn't sit detached and unaware, some general concept of the universe. He considered it worthwhile to become like us and to walk the human life. And now he cares about you. He knows what you're going through. So I give you today not some path of yoga and meditation to achieve enlightenment, but a God who's absolutely present and able to carry you through what you're going through. Let's pray. But who are we that you should consider us? You are vast beyond our ability to understand. You created the heavens and the earth with a word of command. And yet you look on us. You are so incredibly concerned with us. Yet we never give a thought to the ants that we walk over on our way into church this morning. Yet you became like us. So God, as we consider these things, I'm just reminded the staggering nature of your grace, that it doesn't depend on us or our abilities or our learning or our enlightenment. It is because of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ that we stand before you today. So I pray for those present who are struggling with pain. That we remind us of these things, that these things are true. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.